Hello class, and welcome to our discussion on absolute versus comparative advantage. Okay, so from our lesson we saw that an absolute advantage is when a country can produce any item more efficiently than any other country. Okay, so right here I have a scenario for us. Okay, on the left side of the screen we can see that we are comparing the United States car production, and then on the right side of the screen to Canadian car production and TV production. Okay, so in this scenario, the US can produce the following items. They can produce 6 cars and 3 TVs. Okay, whereas Canada can produce 1 car and 2 TVs. Okay, so my question to you then is, which country has an absolute advantage in cars? Okay, which country can produce more cars? And the answer is very simple, okay? The United States can produce more cars, okay? We can produce 6 cars, whereas Canada can produce 1 car, okay? That's an absolute advantage. We can just outright produce more cars than Canada, okay? Now let's see who has an absolute advantage in TVs, okay? And it's very simple. The United States has an absolute advantage in TVs. We can produce 3 TVs, okay, whereas Canada can produce 2 TVs. Okay, so we can produce more, therefore it's said that we have an absolute advantage when it comes to producing TVs. Okay, so absolute advantage is pretty straightforward. It's when one country can produce more of an item, okay, than another country can produce that same item. Straightforward, it's just compare the numbers between the two countries. The country that produces the most of a particular item has the absolute advantage. All right, so we just looked at absolute advantage. Fairly straightforward. We're just comparing, okay, the amount of something that one country can produce compared to the amount of that same product that another country can produce, okay? The country that can produce the most has an absolute advantage. Now that's a little bit different than a comparative advantage, okay? Comparative advantage is when we know that a country has at least 2 absolute advantages, right? We know that the US can produce more cars. We know that the US can produce more TVs. Okay, but the question becomes is, can the US or should the US produce more cars or more TVs and import whatever it doesn't produce itself? Okay, where is it more efficient at? In order to do that, we have to do a little bit of math. We have to do a little bit of comparison of ratios. Okay, so our question here is, does the US have a comparative advantage in cars or TVs? We know it has an absolute advantage in both, but where is its comparative advantage? Which is it more efficient at? Making cars or making TVs relative to what Canada can produce cars and TVs at? Okay, in order to do that, we have to take the 6 cars, okay, that the US can produce, and we have to compare that to the 1 car, okay, the 1 car that Canada can produce. Okay, if we take 6 over 1, that is equal to the whole number of 6. Okay, any number over 1 is that number itself. Okay, and then we need to compare that ratio to the same ratio for TVs. So here we'll take the 3 TVs that the United States can produce, compare that to the 2 TVs that Canada can produce. Okay, 3 over 2 is 1.5. Okay, 1.5. Right, so now, the higher number, the higher whole number, that is the product that a country has a comparative advantage to. That is where they are more efficient, okay? That is where they should spend more of their time producing that item and then importing the other item where they do not have a comparative advantage, okay? It's better for the United States to use their resources to produce cars in this scenario than it is to produce televisions, okay? All right, so we know that the United States has a comparative advantage in producing cars, okay? But the question is, does Canada have a comparative advantage in cars or TVs? And I can tell you that the answer is going to be TVs, okay? Because we eliminated cars from on the previous slide, we know that the United States has a comparative advantage in cars. That means that Canada cannot have the comparative advantage, okay? If the US has the comparative advantage in cars, it has to be Canada that has the comparative advantage in TVs. Okay, that's the only option left. But I want to show you how the math, the way that we did the ratios, can prove this out for us as well. Okay, so here we would take the number of cars that Canada can produce, which is 1, over the number of cars that the US can produce, which is 6. Okay, 1/6. Okay, and now we would do the same thing with televisions. Okay, 2 over 3. Okay, now this 2/3 I can tell you is 0.66. Okay, 1 over 6 I believe is 0.125. Okay, so now here, the country with the highest ratio number, okay, that's where they have their comparative advantage. 0.66 is greater than 0.125. So therefore we would say, and we've proven it, is that Canada has a higher comparative advantage in producing TVs. So Canada in this instance would be better off to produce televisions, okay, and then import their cars from the United States. Okay, they're more efficient at it. Therefore, they can produce the TVs at lower costs, okay, whereas the United States can produce the cars at lower cost. And therefore, both countries benefit by producing the item that they can do more efficiently and then importing the items in from the other country that they're not as efficient at lower prices. And this is one of the large advantages of international trade. Okay, customers get the lowest price, okay, for items, and resources are used in the most efficient manner to produce the items that we want and need.